and welcome everybody to A Novel Reads Book Club for winter 2022, all about the Paris Library. I'm going to turn it over here to Dr. Paul Kotz, who's going to lead us through a nice little discussion.
Well, it is wonderful to see all of you here in 2022. Happy New Year to everybody. I was talking to Tony beforehand that the Paris Library was a surprisingly good read for me. And I started it over the break and I enjoyed it immensely. Tell you a little bit about what we found. Of course, I keep trying to look for the best in the midst of this pandemic. So there's a picture in St. Paul right before the freeze again, and a nice sunset. But Janet, let's talk about her for a minute. We did reach out to her by Twitter, and she did get back to me, but she's busy. So she is an award-winning author of Moonlight in Odessa, and of course this book. Her shorter work has appeared in reviews such as Slice and Montana Noir. She first became interested in the incredible true story of the librarians, as you know, who stood up to the Nazi book protector. And this somewhat emanated from her time as program manager at the American Library in Paris. Believe it or not, she divides her time. Some of you divide your time maybe between Minnesota and a warmer climate, like some of our guests tonight. And she divides her time between Montana and Paris. Just so you know a little bit about Janet, she instant New York Times bestseller, #1 Indie Next Pick book, Libraries Read Selection, Lone Star Selection, which I'm not familiar with, Book Reporter Best Bet, and named the most anticipated book, as some of you mentioned before we got started, by Goodreads and the Library Journal. Her novel, The Paris Library, is still scheduled, if it's not already, to be published in 30 countries. And there is a picture of the existing library in one of the rooms. Also, I'll give you a synopsis, but just to give you a review, I was kind of amazed that you had two kind of stories, if you may, going parallel. But you got Paris 1939, you got young and ambitious Odile Sochet. She has it all. Her handsome police officer, Beau, a dream job at the American Library in Paris. But when the Nazis march into Paris, Odile stands to lose everything she holds dear, including her beloved library. Together with her fellow librarians, Odile joins the resistance with the best weapons she has. At least it seems, books. But when the war finally ends, instead of freedom, Odile tastes the bitter sting of unspeakable betrayal. But in the book as well, as you know, Montana in 1983, Lily's a lonely teenager looking for adventure in small town Montana. Her interest is piqued by her solitary, elderly neighbor, but as Lily uncovers more about her neighbor's mysterious past, she finds that they share a love of language, the same longings, and the same intense jealousy, never suspecting that a dark secret from the past connects them. We all have consequences for their choices, and there's that extraordinary heroism that's also found in the quietest of places. I share this with you before we get started. This is an emblem that shows up in all books that are produced and held in the American Library in Paris. It says Aetrum post bellum ex libris lux, which apparently means after the darkness of war, the light of books. And you can tell that emblem was made in 1920, right after World War I, even though this book, as you know, has a setting in World War II. So I jump into my first question for all of you. Are you ready? Many historical fiction stories adopt the dual timeline format. Why do you think that's a popular choice for the genre? Anybody?
Well, I think it helps to make it more relevant if, especially if the timeline is closer to the time in which, we're living now. And it makes it easier to relate to the characters as they're, being portrayed. At least I found that to be true with, the younger person in the story, thinking about her in the 80s, and then wondering about this elderly neighbor who could have been just anybody, but ended up being this very, complex person, who came over, after the war. And so I think that's one of the reasons.
I love it, Ann. Anybody else on that one?
I was thinking a similar thing. It helps keep your interest, especially if you're not a history person to begin with. It's such an interesting way to get some facts or factoids about history.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Ann and Lori. Anybody else want to chime in on that? It may lead into this next question. Feel free to even revisit this. Were you more engaged in one storyline over the other? Is anybody did you identify either with Odile or Lily's ventures?
I was more interested in the earlier one, Odile's.
Yeah.
And this connects with the your first question, I think. And that is it's a way of indicating that despite the difference in time, it was 40 years difference between the first story, the older story, and the later one, they have a lot in common. The generations are definitely view each other as quite different from themselves, but in the case of the novel, there's a lot in common as well, which is often overlooked, I think, when one generation thinks of another.
That's a really good insight, Noel. Yeah, I really liked Odile, as well as Lily, but Odile, I really got into that story and wanted to see what was going to happen next. Anybody else on that?
I agree. I liked Odile, and I just found it fascinating that there was this Paris library. Well, there is, and there's subscribers, and they get things from all over, and I did enjoy Odile and how she kind of thought in the Dewey Decimal System. I really enjoyed, now 831.7 landscapes or what. That's not correct, but just kind of how all of the things that were important to her, she always knew where they landed in the Dewey Decimal System, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I hear you, Beth Ann. I know that was really kind of a fascinating take in this book. I learned that most libraries, they have their own unique systems within that main structure. And I thought that was interesting too. It's not completely uniform among all American library systems, but that was something I learned after the fact. But yeah, I like that part of the stories too. Anyone else?
I actually flip-flopped a couple of times over which one was more interesting. I'm also a sucker for a good cliffhanger. So I really appreciated when she was, switching between stories, when she would leave on a sudden, very suspenseful element. There was something that was about to happen. But I think I started really enjoying Odile's timeline and that story and kind of going through it. But as I really started to get to know Lily a little bit better, I think I started enjoying hers a lot more throughout. And I started to feel for her a little bit, and especially just the whole story arc of losing her mother and how she dealt with that and the new stepmom. And that became a lot more engaging. I still loved Odile's timeline, but I started to relate towards Lily a lot stronger and more engaged with her towards the end of the book.
Yeah, well said, Tony. Well said. Let me venture to go ahead. Continue.
Well, I'm not sure, this might be a little tangential, but it just struck me that, having this library available, that, books could be given and taken to prisoners of war and sent to places where prisoners were. It just, it almost made the war feel less, I don't know, I don't know what the right word is, but it just added a taste of civility to wartime that I didn't expect to find out or to understand or even believe. I mean, I can't imagine people in POW camps receiving these books and these, and these packages, and being able to have that kind of contact with the outside world, knowing how bad some POW camps really were at some point and how they are today. I mean, even I can't imagine that kind of civility happening in today's, war front at all.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I mean, you coined it well. It's that you were looking for the right word, and I think you found it. I mean, it did add a sense of civility, but it took some of that stress level off and gave us and gave them a chance to escape for a while.
Mhm.
I think when you were thinking of a word, I was thinking of the word gruesomeness of the war
Yeah.
It's
and that.
yeah, actually, yeah, to leave that pain. Let me venture to the next one for you. What do you like best about reading World War II historical fiction? Maybe you don't. And with that, it's kind of coupled with this. Did you even know about the American Library in Paris prior to reading this novel?
I did not. I've been to Paris twice, and I don't remember it ever popping up on my radar as it's a place to go visit. And if I go back to Paris, I definitely will find it.
Yeah, same for me. I didn't know it existed, but there's a black and white picture of
Yeah.
it, but you can expand it and look it up on Google as well. Anybody else want to add to that question?
It occurs to me that in 1920, when it was founded, that's just a little before people like Hemingway and a number of other people were living in Paris.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I can't help assuming they were well aware of the American Library in Paris and patronized it and so on. So it's an aspect of their lives that I certainly wasn't aware of, nor the library itself.
Yeah, that's right. I'm pretty sure that Hemingway, he spoke very highly of it in some of his own writings. So that's interesting to hear. Let's see. Anybody else on that?
I was not aware that even existed, but what I really enjoy about historical fiction in general is the aspect of learning something about history that is presented in such a different way than what you would normally get it in a classroom setting, which at least when I was in high school learning, American history, it wasn't very interesting to me. And I've never really been enthralled with history, but historical fiction has taught me a lot. And then you get that little earworm and you're like, I really need to go look up more about this and find out more about it. So you become a little bit more educated about that.
Yeah, I think, what Noel and Lori are saying as well in this, that I don't know if you saw at the end of the book, there's an author's note at the end, and where Janet goes back to describing some of her characters, which we'll get into here momentarily. And then saying that, well, this part was really true about what I wrote, and this part was a little deviation from what actually happened. But I think that's worth looking at after the fact, after you've read the book.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pop into the next one for you. If you want to add to these, I can always go back. But my fourth question would be, why is it important for librarians to continue to spread the love of reading during the war? I know some of you mentioned that earlier. I think Anne did as well to get us started. Anybody want to add to that? Or is that important?
Well, I think sometimes it can just even take to me it and I think that was for Odile too. I can kind of take you away from what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, in your imagination. I don't know. I just think it's really important, and I think even even today librarians are really in some systems are really struggling to like keep all kinds of books available to people, so the more things change, right, the more they stay the same.
Yes, well said, Beth Ann. Well said. It's even struck me as startling that even in the United States, when we've gone through some areas of crisis or wartime, where certain readings and books have been destroyed, and then say, well, these are banned books in schools and so on. But it was good that they were able to preserve some of the fine works of art, and so I'm glad for that too.
I was thinking as well on question 4 there.
Let me go back.
It
Yeah.
added another item of normalcy kept another item of normalcy in their lives when there was so much turmoil going on.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. We want to stay in a sense where we feel some comfort and calm. And I think it continued to provide it. In fact, that picture on the bottom right that Lori was mentioning in her response to this question, that's also one of the rooms of that Paris library. It's just a beautiful structure.
It looks like it.
Let me venture into question 5. Okay, here we go. In terms of the characters, let's talk about the friendship, if you want, between Odile and Lily. What did you think that they both learned from each other? In what ways were they similar?
Well, I mean, there was that whole thing about, I think with what Odile shared with her kind of closer at the beginning of the book, that things aren't always as they seem to be, right? Like that she liked that boy and she thought this cheerleader was his girlfriend, but she really wasn't. And the same thing at first when Odile was interested in Paul, that she thought he didn't really like her, but then he thought he offended her. So, I mean, that kind of thing. So that was one thing that struck me.
Yeah. Anybody else?
They both came from or lived in families that were partly satisfactory and partly unsatisfactory.
Oh.
And oftentimes the unsatisfactory aspects take over. And it was a way, I think, of in meeting, the two of them meeting, kind of a balance in terms of, yes, there are good things and bad things. And if you focus on the good things, you get an entirely different picture of your family than if you simply focus on the difficult times.
Yeah, that's astute, Beth Ann and Noel. I think they've definitely learned from one another. They had similar personalities in some ways, but they could put the salt in the wound with one another too when they had to confront some loggerheads in making decisions. Love it. Anybody else on that?
I have a couple of things that I'll throw out there. So I think one of the biggest similarities that I saw between them is more of their emotional connection. I could see them both feeling similar emotions about kind of similar situations throughout both of their lifetimes. And it was really cool to see Odile coaching Lily through like almost repairing her regrets in some ways. Like, well, this is how I handled it. This is how you should handle it because I don't think I did it correctly. And that similar level of emotion. But then they also had very similar experiences with their fathers, but in a slightly different way. So with Odile's father, his big thing throughout the entire book was, well, you have to find a man and you have to get married. And that's the big thing. You're not okay until you're married with a man. And with Lily's father, it was, you need to get a job that's going to make you money so you can be a strong, independent person and kind of move on. It was that same pressure of like, well, I don't know if that's for me, but I'm getting this pressure from a parental figure that I respect clearly that's telling me to do this thing that I don't think this is where I'm supposed to go. And kind of those different experiences they're wildly different, but at the core are almost the same.
Well stated. These are great insights. I love to listen to what you have to say. Yeah, Odile is she was like a very good mentor for showing what to do in your life and what not to do. I observed. Yeah, let me move
Well,
on.
she was a very reluctant mentor. I mean,
Right.
I like the chapter at near the end where it focuses on Odile right before she meets Lily.
Yeah.
She was very lonely. And I think Lily in her own way was lonely as well, even though she had her best friend. But with her mom being sick and her dad gone all the time, I think she was a lonely girl. And she just kind of walks into Odil's house as only a 13-year-old girl can, and say, I want to talk to you about, I want to write a report about you. And Odile was so lonely, and that just sort of was at the right time for both of them to develop their friendship. Over time, Odile became a part of Lily's family. And that was, since she didn't have her own family anymore, she left them. I thought it was very touching. And I have to say too, at the beginning of the book, I didn't like it. I thought the writing was a little bit on the trite side. I thought, it's like, oh gosh, I got this 13-year-old girl talking about boys, and, she's saying they're saying all these kind of silly things, and Odile's getting mad at her brother's girlfriend because, jealous. I'm thinking, oh man, this book is just going to be insufferable. But it got better. I think that's often the way of relationships in life. Things do get better as you learn more and you understand more. And this goes back to an earlier question about kind of the flipping back and forth between the time periods. One of the things about that I see authors doing, and I think she did it well here, was from the relationship that Lily has with Odile, that all through the story, that Odile does not end up with Paul. You do not know why. We don't know why we don't know why she left Paris until the very end and married somebody else entirely. But I liked that we knew it. So it sort of was okay, so what's going to happen? How does this change? How does she end up in Montana? And without that going back and forth between Lily and Odile, we wouldn't have, I don't know how she would have created that story arc. So I like that aspect of the writing and doing it that way.
Yeah, Nancy, I love what you were saying too. I think Skesley and Charles does that foreshadowing to let us know what's going to happen in some respects with Paul, but we don't know for sure. And I also love what you said about Odile and Lily, and that Odile was a reluctant mentor. It's true. But boy, they had quite a bond as the book went on.
They did. Yeah.
Let me go to this one. Now, this isn't really true. 2 and 1, I've been asking a few multiple questions already. But as was referenced, Odile begins with a romance with Paul and thinks she has it all. But when did you, based on what Nancy said, but when did you start to suspect that darker side to Paul? And if you want, just for those of you that like to connect all the dots, this is like a parallel story, but it intertwined. What was the rippling impact of Raimi joining the French army? Do anybody want to take those or maybe combine them? I don't know. Your choice.
Well, I started to suspect that there was a darker side to Paul when he started taking her to these apartments. Because it's like, it was very romantic, and it was but I'm like, boy, how is he getting access to these places? And he has friends who are also other men who are using these apartments with his girlfriends, and they're just empty. It just kind of was just something that just sort of like tickled my brain and said, something's not right here.
Yeah, that was a good clue. That's great. I'm glad you bring that up.
Well, and it just felt like it was so naive on Odile's part not to figure that out sooner.
Yeah.
To not understand and to realize, why these places were so available and what was really going on in Paris at that time. Because they were certainly aware of, the Jews being persecuted, and, they had to, shelter their own clients who were coming in who were Jews. So I don't know. To me, that was kind of a failure in
the storyline.
maybe so, yeah.
Or
It just,
maybe naivete, though. You know, if she seemed quite sheltered as an individual growing up.
definitely naive. But why
Yeah.
did it take so long for her to figure it out is what I'm trying to understand.
Well, if we look at the larger picture of how many Germans didn't really process what was happening throughout the war, you know, and I don't want to say turning a blind eye, but you know, in that case, you know, all the propaganda that was coming out. And so certainly that wasn't her case, but we don't see what we need to see sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, we prefer to think of everything as good, and you know, and she was in love, and so she was choosing not to question things.
Yeah. But at the same time, it made her much more vulnerable, I guess, to being willing to just throw Paul to the wolves when she realized, you know, what he was actually doing, and when she wouldn't admit her own complicity to it. And so
No,
she just
ran away from it.
ran
Ran
away.
away. Yeah.
Ran away.
Yeah, I couldn't have stated that better. I thought that you know, Odile just got captivated by love, maybe lust, but yeah, going to that room all the time, and then we find out later that, you know, it was stolen from somebody anyway, and it was just vacated. But you know, like I think yeah, Lori was saying, sometimes we just don't want to see things, especially in horrific times.
Right.
So I wasn't sure if it ruined the story, but it, you know, I hear you, that naivete was there. And so you kind of say, hey, come on, wake up. So I hear you. I don't, anybody want to tackle that second part? Did that part of the story, especially when Raimi was also writing notes back and forth to his sister, did you enjoy that part? Or was that just a side element to you?
I enjoyed that part because it brought in a realism of the war that wasn't part of the story otherwise. You know, because I kind of felt throughout the beginning part that there was a lot of things that they were still doing, and having that personal impact, I think, helped her wake up a little bit and realize that, you know, the life that she had was very good, and complaining about her appearance, you know, that was superfluous compared to what he was going through when he was a prisoner of war.
Yeah, that is the astute insight. I love it. Anything else on those? Let me segue to this next one, and if you want to come back to this, feel free. All right, so then there's Margaret. You know, Odile develops a close friendship with Margaret. She also is envious of her lifestyle. And when Margaret begins a relationship with a Nazi soldier, she's horrified. What do you make of her complicated friendship with Margaret? Did anybody enjoy that? First of all, that friendship at first, and how it was developing, and then, oh, it got complicated, didn't it?
I think Odile certainly helped Margaret feel some self-worth, given Margaret's relationship that wasn't there with her husband, how her husband treated her, and have some value, and help her see that she did have gifts to offer, you know, in volunteering with the library, and that, you know, I think I'd be hard pressed to be judgmental about somebody developing a relationship with an enemy soldier. I'm not in that person's shoes, and I feel like I would be very judgmental. I don't know.
Yeah, well stated. Anybody else on that? You go ahead.
I could understand her being judgmental, but then at the same time, here she was using, you know, the Jewish homes to have her, you know, romantic tryst with her boyfriend. So I mean, you know, she was being, you know, pretty two-faced about it, really.
A little double standard going on there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. And she said the things that Margaret obtained for her to send to her brother, she knew that, you know, she knew, but she just didn't want to admit where they were coming from.
Yeah.
And I think part of her, Odile was in part angry with herself and not just Margaret. And that's why she ended up letting it slip to Paul, who Margaret was involved with. Because I mean, I've done stuff like that where I'm mad, and so I say something or do something that reveals something that I shouldn't have, just because it's a way to get back at somebody else and make me feel better about some of my own stupid choices. Not that I make them anymore, but that, I used to in my youth.
The folly of youth, is that what you're saying, Nancy?
Yeah.
I think it was a slip, but I thought it was intentional on Odile's part, though. I mean, my recollection, and maybe I took it differently than everybody else who read the book.
Lori,
No, I
I
think it
read
was
it as intentional. Sorry,
Yeah.
Nancy.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I definitely saw that as a very intentional gig at Margaret. I think she did that on purpose.
Yeah.
Through that same, and with the same naivete we were talking about earlier, where I don't think she fully got the weight of what she did in her anger and her emotion, because she was in this state of denial of what was really happening, which it kind of sounded like a lot of people were at that time, the way this book was written. But it was a very intentional strike when she found out of like, how could Margaret do this? And I have to talk to Paul about it because I need to throw this out at him. And so I think that was intentional. I am also curious, Daryl and Liz, what your thoughts are on some of the things we've been talking about.
I will fully admit I missed the original posting for when this book came out. So I only saw it a couple days ago. So I haven't read it, but I wanted to at least jump on and listen in and represent the Alumni Association. And it sounded like a fascinating book. So I wanted to at least listen in. So that's kind of why I'm being a little more quiet.
Hopefully my microphone works. I like this book, but I bought an ebook copy of it, and near the end, some of the pages were missing, which
Oh, no.
makes it hard to follow the story. But I like the dual storylines quite a bit because they layered and, like you said, gave you that cliffhangers. What's going to come next? Oh no, now I have to wait 3 more chapters to find out what happened. But more interesting to me was the library itself. For the longest time through most of the book, I couldn't figure out why they kept talking about subscribers. Who are subscribers at a library? And then near the end explained these people would actually pay memberships to belong to the club, to visit and use the resources. And that part of it was interesting to me because that's not how our American library system works here. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Liz. Now it's like you have unlimited time to return library books, many cases, due to the pandemic.
Mhm.
Yeah, and no fee. Everyone
no
can
Right.
go. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Although our library, because it doesn't charge for, overdue
Access. Yeah.
books or resources anymore, what they've gone to is if you have something that's overdue, they don't let you check something out until you return that item. So they have a
That's
mechanism
better.
in place to keep, you don't want to have somebody keep something out for 2 years.
I love it. Well, I also relate with Daryl. Daryl, if you're still out there, I'm one thing I
I'm
wanted
still
to, I wasn't sure if I would be able to get through the book when Tony was letting me know that, it'll probably be a month from now. And I thought, oh gosh, with work constraints and so on, but because the break provided, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. So be curious if you do go down the route, Daryl. I'd love to hear what you have to say down the road, because it was
I
definitely,
plan.
it's worth
I
it.
definitely plan on it because, to kind of go back to answer one of your earlier questions, I love historical fiction books, especially like World War II one. So I will definitely circle back and get this at some point here in the near future. Yeah, because it definitely sounded something right up my alley.
Well, I'm going to go into question 8 for everybody. And this was alluded to already, but, Margaret is eventually attacked by Paul physically, right? And when Odile learns the truth, she leaves behind Paris forever to marry an American. What did you think of this decision by Odile to leave everything behind?
initially I thought it was she's taking the easy way out again, that she wasn't facing up to a mistake that she made. Although, in real life, this kind of thing really did happen to women after World War II in Paris. And if you watch any of the historical documentation on WTTW or PBS, whatever they call it up there, it's just, it doesn't make it right what the women were doing initially or what happened to them after, but it just that people would become that barbaric is just and rather than facing that mistake, she because she did marry Paul on the sly, so she left her husband. And I'm wondering, how long it took her to learn, to be able to face up to mistakes that she made. And I think maybe Lily helped bring that out because she was that reluctant mentor to Lily, that she, helped her see that those choices that she made way back when, it's never too late to make amends.
I like the comment too near the end where Odile is talking to Lily and saying, sometimes people ask for things but don't really mean it. Margaret said, I never want to see you again. And Odile took it literally and left.
Oh.
And in hindsight, she feels bad, like she should have stayed. She should have worked through it. It was her best friend.
Yeah, well said, Liz, Lori, bringing that in to the play, because here you go. Here's my question 9, Liz. Will Odile ever reconnect with Margaret again?
I feel like she's too far down the path. She's so far along in life and seems resigned to her choices.
But she gave Lily that opportunity in her stead, because there was a woman in a white hat in front of the American Library in Paris. And my guess is that, knowing that whole story now, Lily could have been the bridge or the conduit to help possibly repair that relationship.
Anybody else on that? I know it's all speculative, and you all would be right. I have no idea on what would happen there, but I was hoping that there might be a connection. And then, let me bring you all back, so that's all I had in terms of like some, focused questions, but let me stop the share and bring us all back. Oh, there we go. I think that, yeah. Can we fit everybody on there? I think that is. How do you do that, Tony?
I'm just super great at all things technology.
I was going to say,
This is like Hollywood Squares,
It really is.
Although, Andy, Tony, you're probably too young to know Hollywood Squares.
I that might be because I didn't quite get that reference, but sorry if I made anyone feel a little bit older tonight. But
We're all old.
Yeah, I think circling back, one thing, just a couple questions as far as like the Odile leaving Paris, one other layer, and this kind of was something that it's connecting what we thought of the book. I appreciated how many different layers there were and everything that was going on in both storylines. But one other layer that I think we forget about with Odile leaving, because it's the immediate trauma and what Paul did and the relationship with Margaret and all those things that turned her away, but it hit a point, so she had to leave her husband, which meant she had to get a divorce. And if we remember right at the beginning of the book, we learned that one of the worst things in the eyes of Odile's mother is a divorce. And I'm curious to know if that was part of that reasoning as to why she left, was because, okay, now I'm breaking this marriage vow that happened, so my mother's never going to want to talk to me, and I lost my best friend. and I can't bear to look at the husband that I'm leaving. So it's almost that other little layer in there that we learned about that almost seems like a trivial piece of information that really could have been a very substantial part of why she moved to Montana.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Do you
kept wondering
think
the mechanics of it all. I mean, how did she really do that? Did she actually get a divorce, or did she
that's
just
what I was wondering.
avoid, the whole idea and just pretend like, she was never married and then just leave? And then how would she get a passport? I mean, it's those little details that kind of bug me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I never ever got the inclination anywhere that there was an official divorce at any point. So it's almost like she just left it behind and said, I'm justified in doing that. Do you think that she loved her American husband? Because sometimes there's love at first sight. I mean, she was leaving an old life for a new life. What are your thoughts on that? Or could you pick that up from the story? Maybe not.
I think I saw it almost as like an arranged marriage situation when you hear about those, it's like, oh, they were enough. They provided for me. They did these things for me. They were enough to keep me satisfied.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that love that she felt with Paul. At least it didn't feel like that in the way the story was going. But we also only knew him through her depression throughout the storyline. Because for most of the time when we knew about the new guy, it was when she was almost suicidal. So there's a whole different lens that we're learning about this new guy and whether or not she loved him.
True.
You talked about different layers, and I liked the thoughts of the stepmom, and how she had to live up to Saint Brenda, and how her own mother comes in and is just taking charge. You need help. You have 2 children, 2 young toddlers. And I was interested because that was only kind of alluded to, like, little bits of the relationship. Like, that character would be fascinating to me, how much she felt she needed to be what everyone else wanted.
Oh, and something that I just recalled from you saying that, Liz, was how Odile helped her see, what was her name? I want to say Cheryl. I can't even remember what the stepmother's name was. Helped her see that that she had that voice and would be able to stick up for herself and say, I do need help, and make her husband be available to help with the child care.
Yeah.
And that, so, she helped her in that respect as well. And subsequently helped Lily see her stepmother in a different light as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like Lily really grew to appreciate her stepmom.
Yeah.
As the book went on, which I was very happy to see.
Yeah.
Are you trying to search for her name?
Yeah, I am.
Was it
I just can't remember her stepmother's name.
Eleanor?
Eleanor.
Okay, it was Eleanor.
Thank you.
And her mom was a wonderful character too. Whatever they called her, Grandma something.
Grandma Pearl.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Was that Grandma Pearl?
Kind of a no nonsense person.
Yeah.
But somebody that would call a spade, so to speak, and not beat around the bush. But I think do it in a loving, caring way.
And I liked then it flipped back to Lily's perspective. She talks about them rushing out then to buy a truckload of Pampers. Like, that's exactly how a teenager would describe it.
Yeah. I think too, the one thing that I was thinking of when Lily was going through Odile's house, that there is that age of curiosity where you're nosy in other people's business, and it's not right, but your curiosity gets the best of you. And I just thought, oh yeah, I can remember when I was that age, and being very insatiable about things and didn't always make the best decisions then.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it didn't seem like Odile came down on her too hard, right? I mean, she kind of read her the riot act at the beginning, but then it almost like did she understand that? She was kind of rummaging through her things. I'm not sure. Not sure.
Those letters, those what she called crow letters, were confusing to me when they first started appearing in the book. Like I wasn't clear, ooh, who's the secret person who's tattling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it got better, like to understand more what was happening.
Yeah, I kept waiting for, the author to be revealed, like maybe it was Paul, or maybe it was,
Yeah.
father or somebody like that.
And
Yeah.
it ended up being a number of people. And then for Lily to even accuse Odile, she really thought those were her letters.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I thought one of the brave things Lily did though was go to her father's office to take those letters from the community, whoever was writing them, and abscond with them and get rid of them and try and do her part, what she felt she was able to do to help the cause, so to speak.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So she wasn't all selfish back then.
He was definitely conflicted.
Yeah.
Oops.
Lori, you hit on another really cool parallel with the two storylines and the two lives, because Lily also has a moment where she has to go into her father's office and stand up for what she believed in when she was getting help. And that was just one of those other things I really appreciated with what was happening in both story arcs, when they were experiencing, once again, very different worlds and different things, but in a very similar way that lended to their relationship and brought them closer together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing too, when the way, again, the book was structured. First, it would, it'd talk about, it would be chapter title Odile, and it would say Lily, Odile, Lily. And then all of a sudden it'd be Paul in there. But it was, I did like the way the dual stories. I did love that approach. But, even Miss Reader had her own chapter once in a while. But it was pretty much throughout the whole book, it was Odile and Lily. Those are the main characters. But the way she titled the chapters, she put a timeline underneath too, which was kind of unique. I don't know your
Not
thoughts.
always, though.
Yeah, not
Not
always.
always.
Yeah, there wasn't always a timeline. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I did not like about the book, and it's more the style in which it was written, was those kind of inconsistencies. And what I think, Liz, you just said about these letters that all of a sudden would appear. Like, what? Like, okay, somebody's writing this. Who is it? Why? And I just didn't. I found that made the book itself just less appealing as I was reading it.
Do you think maybe the author was wanting you to feel agitated?
I don't know.
Because when we read Anxious People last time, the author was stylistically using a particular writing mechanism to make us feel, like, I don't know if I can read this. It's just too much stress on me. And I was thinking that it kind of, to me, really hit home about what Neighbor was doing to Neighbor at that time. It made me uncomfortable thinking, and I would be thinking then, who is that person? And I did expect it to be one person and have like some kind of big reveal though.
Lori, that's a really good question. I wonder if that was her intention. I don't have the answer to that, but wouldn't it be great if we had Janet here? I'm not going to say she's here like last time when we had the author show up. That was a rare situation, but I did reach out to her and she could not be here. She's a little bit, she's got a pretty good speaking schedule. But on that note, one thing I'd always ask, if you could ask the author a question, what would it be? With that, Lori brought up a great one.
You know, I'm always interested in when it's something is historical fiction, you know, how much access the author had to records and documentation to support the story. And of course, she does the author's note at the end.
Yeah.
But, you know, just getting into archives to be able to read some of those documents, and to me, to have that actual piece of history in my hand would be, I don't want to say overwhelming, but it'd be like, oh my gosh, you know?
I was fascinated in the author's notes at the end that these were real people.
Mhm.
Yeah, they weren't even made up character names. They were real.
Yeah.
One of the things with this kind of book where you have a back and forth between different characters, I always wonder about the author. In this case, how did she write that? Did she write Odile's story, kind of sketched it through the whole lifeline, and then come back to Lily and fit the other characters in? Or did it kind of back and forth? Different writers have different approaches to the way they do these things. And sometimes too, and I kind of get the impression here, each chapter is kind of a little short story in itself. And that's another way, at least I believe some writers work. They actually write a little short story, and then on different aspects of the character, and then eventually put it all together and tie it all together, changing elements and so on as needed. But it's that kind of question I always find wanting to ask and not always having the opportunity to do so, since the author is not around.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that as well, Noel. That's a very good question.
That is a good question.
The question I've always wanted to ask is, and I think this more just comes from me being a writer and my background with writing, is what's their process in regards to, do they work off an outline, or do they just let the story just flow and come as it comes? You know, because there's no right or wrong.
Right.
And some authors work off the outline and it's hardcore. They've got everything plotted out, and then there's some that they
Just
dive
run.
into it and they just let the story flow and the story just comes out. And that's one question I've always wanted to ask is something like that. What's their process about going through it?
Yeah, that'd be a good question too. I have to go. I've got another book club in well, the screen just changed on me.
Yeah, what book did you read for your next book club, Nancy?
I don't know.
Oh.
I didn't read anything, and I'm not sure that we had one.
Okay.
This month, so I'll find out in a couple minutes if they read a book or not. In any case, I didn't read it, whatever it was. So it's it operates a little bit loosely. But it was great to see everybody.
Great to see
Thank
you
you
too.
for your time.
Happy New Year.
Together. Happy New Year to all of you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, well, we're at the end of the hour here. Tony, I don't know if you have any closing remarks, but it's always good. This is such a spirited group and insightful group, and we get some new ideas. I learned a lot from people and what they had to say. I enjoyed the book overall. I thought it was very good. One last thing, tell you, before I even opened it up, I go, wow. I don't usually read books with a kind of, I want to say, an embossed cover. I mean, this is kind of classy, So, but it was beautiful as well.
Yeah, I just,
For your leadership, Paul. I really appreciate the work you put into thinking up the questions and getting us going in a conversation discussion.
Oh, thank you, Ann. That's great to know. Tony and I work as a good team.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that and say thank you, Paul. This was wonderful, and thanks to everybody for coming out and joining us. This was a fantastic discussion for a really, really fantastic book, in my opinion. And it was great to see all of you, and I hope to continue seeing you guys throughout with all of our other events. And as always, stay tuned to the other things we got going on. Our national circuit is about to start here in February, so. And for those in Florida, if you want to join us out there and have a good time with other alumni in the area, we'd love to see you.
Hey, Tony, could I ask too, because we got a couple minutes on the clock. Do you think our next book, even though it may not be decided as of now, are we shooting for a couple months from now? Do you think is that reasonable or?
Yeah, I think the next one that we have on our schedule, and we can always add another one, but I think the next one that I saw was in May. So we have quite a few months, but I would be more than happy to add another one in between there if that's what we would like, because it is definitely a pleasure to be with you guys.
I know we had a couple of Alan Eskin books on the last list to look from, and he's a Rosemount author, a former lawyer. He actually was kind enough to participate in a Zoom conversation in another book club I had. So if you're looking to get an author involved, he's coming out with another book too. I just saw something on his Facebook page today. So, if that's, I can't remember how we decided to read the Paris Library, but check him out too, as far as local authors or things like that.
Yeah, I know Lori's mentioned that one before. I'd like to explore that too. And is that ESKIN?
ESKENS.
KENS. Eskens.
Alan Eskins.
There you go.
Yeah. And if you're looking for another book with the title with the word library in it, for my other book club, we just read the book called The Midnight Library. It's kind of a story of a woman on her last rope, so to speak. And it's the whole premise is if you had an opportunity to make different choices in your life, what would those choices made in how your life played out? And that. So the Midnight Library is the amazing place where people can do that. So it was an interesting read also.
Awesome. All right, great to see everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend, everybody.
Yep.
Same to
Thanks,
you.
Tony. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
You too. Nice meeting.